CEO fired the cleaner, but the little daughter came begging. She was 7 years old, clutching a crayon drawing of a house with 3 stick figures under a rainbow, when she walked into the most powerful office in the city and asked the man behind the mahogany desk, "Are you the one who made my mama cry?" The elevator to the 47th floor of Harrison Industries moved like a silent prayer through the steel spine of downtown. At 5:47 a.m., James Harrison was already reviewing quarterly reports, his reflections sharp against the ascending numbers that marked his daily ascent to power. Armani suit pressed to perfection, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a Rolex that had been his father's, the only inheritance that mattered from a man who died broke and broken. The elevator doors opened to reveal an empire built on precision. Harrison Industries occupied the entire floor, its glass walls offering a god's-eye view of the city awakening below. James moved through the space like a conductor approaching his orchestra, every step deliberate, every gesture calculated. His corner office waited behind frosted glass doors etched with his name in gold lettering that caught the morning light like a promise. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." His assistant, Patricia, appeared with military timing, coffee steaming in a cup that had never known the touch of anything but the finest Brazilian beans. "The board meeting is at 9. The quarterly numbers are on your desk. And sir," she paused, her voice dropping to the tone reserved for delicate matters, "the layoff recommendations are in the red folder." James nodded, already absorbed in the first report. Numbers told stories that people couldn't complicate with emotions. Revenue down 8.3%. Operational costs up 12%. The math was simple, even if the human cost was not. He had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not if he wanted to keep the company his father had lost, the security his family had been denied, the power that meant no one could ever take anything from him again. The red folder sat on his desk like a judgment. Inside, 37 names. 37 people who would wake up tomorrow in a different world. James had made these decisions before, hundreds of times. It was the price of leadership, the weight of responsibility. Each name represented a salary, a benefit package, a line item that needed to be eliminated for the greater good of the whole. What would you think about leaders who have to make impossible choices? How do you balance business necessity with human impact? Share your thoughts below. Underscore 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 47 floors below, in the building's basement level, Maria Santos was finishing her shift in a world that existed in the shadows of the one above. The custodial storage room smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and the faint aroma of the coffee she'd brewed in a small electric pot, a luxury she'd allowed herself after 3 months of saving quarters. Her uniform was clean, but showed the wear of someone who took pride in her work, even when no one was watching. "Mama, are you almost done?" Sofia's voice drifted from the security guard's break room, where she'd been sleeping on a small cot that Bob, the night security guard, had set up for her. 7 years old and already adapted to a life that required flexibility, Sofia had learned to find comfort in unconventional places. Her school backpack sat beside the cot, homework completed by the light of a small lamp, her spelling words practiced in the margins of her mother's cleaning checklist. "Almost Mija," Maria called back, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., then caught a few hours of sleep before her daughter's school day began. She moved through the executive floors with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that her job was to be invisible, to leave no trace except the sparkle of clean glass and the scent of fresh lemon oil on wood that cost more than her monthly rent. Maria had been cleaning these offices for 2 years, and she knew them like a mother knows her children's faces. The corner office, Mr. Harrison's domain, was always immaculate, as if the man who worked there left no evidence of being human. No family photos, no personal touches, just the cold perfection of success. She had never met him, had only heard his voice occasionally carrying through the glass when he worked late, sharp and decisive, cutting through problems like a blade through silk. In the break room, Sofia was awake now, sitting on the edge of the cot with her knees drawn up, watching her mother through the open doorway. At 7, she possessed the kind of wisdom that comes from watching your parents sacrifice everything for your future. She knew that her mama worked while other mamas slept, that their small apartment was painted with love instead of expensive wallpaper, that her school clothes came from thrift stores but were always clean and pressed with care. "Mama, Mrs. Rodriguez said her husband got fired yesterday," Sofia said, her voice small in the fluorescent-lit space. "Are you going to get fired too?" Maria's hand stilled on the desk she was polishing. Mrs. Rodriguez lived in their apartment building, and her husband had worked at the factory for 15 years. In their neighborhood, job security was as fragile as soap bubbles, beautiful for a moment before they burst and left you with nothing but the memory of what you'd lost. "No, Mija," Maria said, though her voice carried less certainty than she wanted. "I work hard. I do my job well. That's what matters." But even as she spoke, Maria felt the familiar knot of worry that lived in her stomach like a stone. She had no college degree, no special skills beyond the ability to make anything clean, and the determination to never let her daughter see her mother's fear. Every night, she walked through offices that cost more to furnish than she would make in a lifetime, cleaning up after people who made decisions that could change her world without ever knowing her name. Sofia slipped off the cot and padded over to where her mother worked, her small hand finding Maria's free one. "Mama, if you ever got fired, I would go tell them they made a mistake. I would tell them you're the best mama in the world, and they need to give you your job back." Maria's heart clenched with the fierce protectiveness that was both her strength and her vulnerability. She knelt down to Sofia's level, cupping her daughter's face in hands that smelled of cleaning solution and carried the calluses of honest work. "You don't worry about grown-up things, okay? That's my job. Your job is to be 7 and learn your spelling words and dream big dreams." She brushed a strand of dark hair from Sofia's forehead. "Promise me you'll always dream big, Mija. Promise me you'll never let anyone tell you that you can't have everything you want in this world." Sofia nodded solemnly, the weight of the promise settling in her young heart like a seed that would one day grow into something powerful. She didn't understand the economics of their situation, the precarious balance between rent and groceries, between dignity and desperation. She only knew that her mama worked harder than anyone else she knew, and that had to count for something in a world that was supposed to be fair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the high windows, Maria finished her rounds and gathered her supplies. In a few hours, the offices would fill with people who made decisions and moved money and shaped the world from their glass towers. But for now, in the quiet space between night and day, it was just her and Sofia, preparing to face another day with the courage that comes from loving someone more than you love yourself. The elevator that would take James Harrison to his throne would also take Maria Santos to the street, where she would catch 2 buses to get Sofia to school before returning to their small apartment for a few hours of sleep. They existed in the same building but different worlds, their paths crossing only in the invisible traces of Maria's work and the unknowing comfort James found in walking into an office that someone else had made perfect. Neither of them knew that in 3 days, those worlds would collide in a way that would change everything. In the voice of a 7-year-old girl who believed that sometimes, if you ask nicely, grown-ups will do the right thing. 3 days later, the red folder on James Harrison's desk had been transformed from a theoretical problem into a surgical solution. The quarterly board meeting had ended with the kind of applause that came from shareholders who understood profit margins better than human faces. The layoffs were approved, the cuts were sanctioned, and the company's stock price had already begun its upward tick in anticipation of the reduced operational costs. James sat in his corner office as the autumn afternoon painted the city in shades of gold and amber. The view from his window showed a world in constant motion. People rushing along sidewalks, cars weaving through traffic, the perpetual dance of a city that never paused to consider the individual stories within its rhythm. From this height, people looked like figures in a child's toy set, small and manageable and easily rearranged. The list of terminated employees lay before him, each name accompanied by a personnel file that reduced years of service to bullet points and performance metrics. Maria Santos, Employee ID 4847, Night Custodial Services. 2 years of employment. No disciplinary actions. Performance reviews consistently rated satisfactory, with notes about punctuality and attention to detail. Just numbers. Just data. Just the inevitable cost of survival in a market that rewarded efficiency over sentiment. Patricia, please have HR begin the termination process for the individuals on this list, James said, his voice carrying the same tone he used for approving lunch reservations or scheduling board meetings. I want them completed by end of business today. Patricia nodded, her face maintaining the professional neutrality that had made her invaluable over the past 5 years. She had seen these moments before, had watched James make decisions that would ripple through dozens of lives with the same emotional detachment he brought to choosing his morning coffee. It was what made him an effective CEO, she supposed, the ability to see the forest while others got lost among the trees. But as she left his office with the folder that would end 37 careers, Patricia felt the familiar weight that came with being the messenger of institutional necessity. Somewhere in the building, people were going about their daily routines, unaware that their world was about to shift on its axis. Underscore 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 underscore. In the HR department on the 23rd floor, the termination process moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Phone calls were made, meetings were scheduled, and security badges were flagged for deactivation. The Human Resources Department had perfected the art of ending employment relationships with minimal disruption to the remaining workforce. Clean, quick, professional, like removing a bandage from a wound. Maria Santos was halfway through her shift when her supervisor, Janet, appeared in the break room where Sofia was doing her homework under Bob's watchful eye. Janet's face carried the expression of someone who had delivered bad news before, a careful balance of sympathy and business necessity. "Maria, I need to speak with you privately," Janet said, her voice gentle but firm. Sofia looked up from her math problems, her 7-year-old instincts picking up on the tension that suddenly filled the room. Bob, the security guard who had become like a grandfather to her over the past 2 years, reached over and patted her shoulder reassuringly. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said. "Why don't you work on that next problem while your mama talks to Ms. Janet?" In the hallway outside the break room, Janet delivered the news with the kind of practiced compassion that HR professionals developed after years of being the bearers of institutional decisions. Budget cuts. Workforce reduction. Nothing personal. 2 weeks severance pay. Final paycheck would be processed within 7 business days. Maria listened with the stillness of someone who had always known this moment might come, but had never prepared for the reality of it. Her hands, which had been steady while cleaning executive offices just minutes before, began to tremble slightly. Not from fear, she had survived worse than unemployment, but from the recognition that her carefully constructed world was about to require complete reconstruction. "I understand," she said finally, her voice carrying a dignity that made Janet's job both easier and harder. "When is my last day?" "I'm sorry, Maria. Tonight is your last shift. Security will need your badge and keys before you leave." Through the glass door of the break room, Maria could see Sofia bent over her homework, her small tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through a particularly challenging subtraction problem. 7 minus 4 equals 3. Simple math. But some equations couldn't be solved so easily. 1 job minus 1 paycheck equals. What? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the world she knew was about to change? Can I? Can I have a few minutes to tell my daughter? Maria asked. Janet nodded, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the human being underneath. Of course. Take your time. Back in the break room, Sofia looked up as her mother entered, her dark eyes immediately reading the change in Maria's expression. Children, Maria had learned, were like small emotional barometers, capable of detecting shifts in atmospheric pressure that adults spent years learning to ignore. Mama, what's wrong? Maria sat down beside her daughter, reaching for words that would convey truth without crushing hope. Mija, sometimes grown-ups have to make changes to their jobs. The company needs to save money, so they won't need me to clean the offices anymore. Sofia's crayon stopped moving across the paper. They fired you? The directness of the question, delivered without malice or judgment, hit Maria like a physical blow. In Sofia's world, things were still simple enough to be named clearly. Adults got fired when they did something wrong, or when the people in charge made mistakes, or when the world failed to be as fair as it should be. Yes, Mija. They fired me. Sofia set down her crayon and studied her mother's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. But you're the best cleaner in the whole building. You make everything sparkle. You never miss a day. You told me that hard work always pays off. Maria's heart cracked at the edges, not from her own loss, but from the recognition that her daughter was having her first real encounter with the gap between what the world should be and what it actually was. Sometimes, sweetheart, even when we do our best, things happen that are out of our control. Who decided to fire you? Sofia asked, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was working through a problem that didn't make sense. The people who own the company. They have to make decisions about money and jobs. Sofia was quiet for a long moment, her 7-year-old mind processing information that was too complex for her years, but too important to ignore. What's the name of the person who fired you? Maria hesitated. In her daughter's world, problems had faces and names, and unfairness could be corrected if you just talked to the right person in the right way. His name is Mr. Harrison. But Sofia, this isn't something you can fix by talking to him. This is a grown-up decision. But Sofia was already forming a plan with the kind of determination that came from believing the world was still a place where justice could be achieved through honest conversation. If someone had made a mistake about her mama, then someone needed to know about it. If Mr. Harrison knew how good her mama was at her job, how hard she worked, how much they needed the money, then surely he would change his mind. What would you do if you were 7 years old and someone hurt the person you love most? Sometimes children see solutions that adults miss. What do you think Sofia should do? Underscore 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 underscore. Later that evening, as Maria packed her few personal belongings from her locker and said goodbye to the night shift crew who had become her second family, Sofia sat in the security office with Bob, asking questions that made the older man's heart ache. Bob, do you know Mr. Harrison? The one who fired my mama. Bob looked down at the little girl who had become the bright spot in his solitary night shifts, her presence turning the sterile office building into something that felt more like home. I've seen him, sweetheart. He's the big boss. He makes the important decisions. Is he mean? Bob considered the question carefully. In his 15 years working security at Harrison Industries, he had observed James Harrison from a distance. The man arrived early, stayed late, and moved through the building with the focused intensity of someone carrying enormous responsibility. Bob had never seen him be cruel or unkind, but he had also never seen him be particularly warm or personal with anyone. I don't think he's mean, Sofia. I think he's just busy. Important people sometimes have to make decisions that hurt people, even when they don't want to. Sofia nodded solemnly, filing this information away with the other pieces of the puzzle she was assembling. Where is his office? On the very top floor. The 47th floor. But Sofia, You can't just go up there. That's not how these things work. But Sofia was 7, and 7-year-olds lived in a world where anything was possible if you had enough courage and love to fuel your determination. As she watched her mama say goodbye to the job that had provided their stability, Sofia made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would find Mr. Harrison. Tomorrow, she would explain about her mama and their little apartment and how hard Maria worked to make everything clean and perfect. Tomorrow, she would ask him to please give her mama her job back, because sometimes grown-ups just needed someone to remind them about the right thing to do. As they rode the bus home through the city night, Sofia pressed her face against the window and looked up at the towering buildings that reached toward the stars. Somewhere up there, in an office on the 47th floor, was a man who had made a decision that changed her world. Tomorrow she would change his. Maria, exhausted and worried but trying to remain strong for her daughter, held Sofia close and whispered promises about finding another job, about everything being okay, about how they would figure it out together. But Sofia wasn't listening to her mother's reassurances. She was making plans. The next morning, after Maria had called in sick to her daytime house cleaning job so she could start looking for new work, Sofia did something she had never done before. She told her mama she was going to school, but instead of getting on the school bus, she walked to the downtown metro station with her backpack and her determination and the absolute certainty that came from loving someone more than you feared the consequences of being brave. She was going to find Mr. Harrison. She was going to fix this. And James Harrison, sitting in his corner office reviewing profit projections and market analyses, had no idea that his carefully ordered world was about to be turned upside down by a 7-year-old girl with a crayon drawing and a heart full of love. The elevator to the 47th floor had never carried such important cargo. The elevator to the 47th floor moved with the same silent efficiency it had carried James Harrison to power every morning for the past 8 years. But today, it carried different cargo, a 7-year-old girl with a school backpack, clutching a crayon drawing that showed a house with 3 stick figures under a rainbow, and a heart full of the kind of courage that comes from loving someone more than you fear the unknown. Sofia had never been this high in any building. Through the elevator's glass walls, she watched the city shrink below her, the cars becoming toys, the people becoming dots, until she felt like she was rising into the clouds themselves. Her stomach fluttered, partly from the height, partly from the magnitude of what she was about to do. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 47th floor, and the doors opened to reveal a world that looked like something from a movie. Everything was glass and chrome and polished marble, so clean it seemed to glow. Sofia stepped out onto carpet, so thick her small feet seemed to disappear into it, her eyes wide as she took in the expansive reception area with its floor-to-ceiling windows and leather furniture that looked like it had never been sat in. "Excuse me, honey, are you lost?" The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked up from her computer with concern and confusion. Children didn't just appear on the executive floor of Harrison Industries. Sofia approached the desk with the careful politeness her mother had taught her. "Hi, my name is Sofia Santos. I need to talk to Mr. Harrison, please." "Oh, sweetie," the receptionist, her nameplate read Helen, smiled gently. "Mr. Harrison is very busy, and he doesn't usually meet with. Well, he has a very full schedule today. Is your mommy or daddy here with you?" Sofia shook her head, her dark eyes serious and determined. "My mama can't come because she's looking for a new job. Mr. Harrison fired her, but I think he made a mistake. I need to tell him about my mama so he can give her job back." Helen's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, tinged with the kind of sadness that comes from recognizing a child's innocence colliding with adult realities. She had worked at Harrison Industries for 12 years, had seen the quarterly layoffs, had processed the termination paperwork. She knew that CEO decisions weren't reversed by 7-year-old ambassadors, no matter how sincere their missions. "Honey, I don't think." "Please," Sofia interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of desperate hope. "I drew him a picture, and I practiced what I'm going to say. I promise I won't take very long." Before Helen could respond, the frosted glass doors to James Harrison's office opened, and the man himself stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear as he concluded a call with his characteristic efficiency. "Yes, finalize the Tokyo deal by Friday. I don't want any delays." James ended the call and looked up to see his receptionist engaged in what appeared to be an unusual conversation with a small child. His first thought was irritation. Patricia was supposed to screen visitors, and the last thing he needed was some sort of family emergency disrupting his afternoon schedule. His second thought was confusion. The child was staring at him with an intensity that was both unnerving and somehow familiar. "Helen, what's—" he began, but Sofia stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "Are you Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice clear and brave in the hushed atmosphere of the executive floor. James looked down at the small figure before him. Dark hair in neat braids, school uniform that was clean but showed signs of careful mending, and eyes that held a combination of determination and vulnerability that made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "Yes," he said slowly, his CEO instincts warring with the unexpected nature of the situation. "And you are?" Sofia took a deep breath, the way her mama had taught her to do before saying something important. "My name is Sofia Santos. You fired my mama 3 days ago. She cleans your office at night, and she makes everything perfect, and she never misses work, not even when she's sick. I think you made a mistake." The words hit James like a physical blow. In his carefully ordered world of profit margins and efficiency reports, employees were numbers, positions were line items, and terminations were business decisions divorced from personal consequences. But suddenly, standing before him was the living, breathing result of his clinical mathematics. A child whose world he had altered with the stroke of a pen. James felt the familiar walls of professional detachment rising automatically. "I'm sorry, but this is not appropriate. Children don't belong in corporate offices, and business decisions aren't." "But you don't know about my mama," Sofia interrupted, her voice gaining strength from desperation. "You don't know that she works 2 jobs so I can go to good school. You don't know that she stays up all night cleaning your office because she says work that's worth doing is worth doing right. You don't know that she sold her wedding ring to buy me school supplies." Each word was like a hammer blow against the armor James had spent years constructing around his heart. He could feel Helen and Patricia watching, could sense the disruption this scene was creating in his perfectly managed environment. But more than that, he could feel something cracking inside himself, a fissure in the foundation of his carefully maintained emotional distance. "Young lady," he said, his voice sharper than he intended, "I understand you're upset, but you can't just walk into my office and—" "Please," Sofia said, and the simple word carried such raw hope that it seemed to echo off the glass walls. "Please just listen. I have a picture." She reached into her backpack and pulled out the crayon drawing. A house with 3 stick figures under a rainbow, done in the careful, deliberate strokes of a child who had put all her love into every line. She held it out to James with shaking hands. "This is me and my mama and you," she said, pointing to each figure. "I drew you with us because I thought maybe if you knew about us, you would want to help instead of hurt." James stared at the drawing, at the simple stick figure labeled Mr. Harrison standing beside 2 others labeled Mama, and me under a rainbow that arced over a house drawn with all the optimism a 7-year-old could muster. The figure representing him had a smiling face and arms outstretched toward the other 2, as if he were someone who belonged in their story, someone who cared about their happiness. For a moment, something fundamental shifted in James's chest, a recognition of his own humanity that he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. But then the walls slammed back into place, reinforced by years of training himself to see the bigger picture, to make the hard choices, to prioritize the survival of the whole over the needs of the individual. "I can't accept this," he said, his voice cold and final. "Helen, please call security to escort this child back to wherever she came from, and find out how she got past building security in the first place." Sofia's face crumpled, as if she had been physically struck. The drawing fluttered to the expensive carpet like a wounded bird, its bright colors suddenly seeming garish against the muted professional tones of the office. She had believed, with the absolute faith that only children possess, that truth and love and earnest pleading could change anything. The realization that she was wrong landed on her small shoulders like a weight too heavy to bear. "But I practiced," she whispered, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "I practiced what to say to make you understand." James turned away from the sight of her tears, his jaw clenched against the unfamiliar sensation of guilt clawing at his chest. "Security will be here shortly to take you home. This conversation is over." He walked back toward his office, each step an act of will against the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like his 7-year-old self. The boy who had once watched his own father come home with empty hands and broken promises after being deemed expendable by men in suits who never learned his name. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and helping someone else? Sometimes the walls we build to keep pain out also keep love from getting in. What do you think James is really afraid of? Underscore 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 underscore. 20 minutes later, Sofia sat in the building's security office on the ground floor, her drawing carefully folded and returned to her backpack, her faith in adult fairness lying in pieces around her feet. Bob, the night security guard who had become like family, sat beside her with his large hand gently patting her small shoulder as she cried with the abandoned grief of someone whose world had just revealed itself to be less magical than she had believed. "He wouldn't even look at my picture," she sobbed into Bob's uniform shirt. "He wouldn't listen. He was mean." Bob's own heart ached as he held the child who had brought so much light to his solitary nights. He had seen James Harrison from a distance for years, had respected the man's dedication and work ethic, but seeing Sofia's crushed spirit made him question everything he thought he knew about the character of the man who ran the company. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups get scared," Bob said gently. "And when they're scared, they forget how to be kind." "Scared of what?" "I'm just a little girl. I just wanted him to know about my mama." Bob couldn't explain the complexities of corporate liability, or the fear successful men carried about appearing weak, or the way power could isolate a person from their own humanity. So instead, he held her until her tears slowed, and then he called the school to let them know Sofia was safe, and finally he called Maria. Meanwhile, 47 floors above, James Harrison stood at his corner window looking down at the city that spread below him like a circuit board of lights and possibilities. He had returned to his office, closed the door, and attempted to resume his normal routine. But the quarterly reports seemed to blur before his eyes. The profit projections felt meaningless, and every few minutes he found himself glancing at the spot on the carpet where a 7-year-old girl had dropped a crayon drawing of a world where he was someone worth trusting. Patricia knocked and entered with his afternoon coffee and a careful expression. "Mr. Harrison?" Security took the little girl home. "She's safe." James nodded without turning from the window. "Good. And I want building security reviewed. Children shouldn't be able to access the executive floors." "Of course, sir." Patricia hesitated at the door. "Sir?" The little girl, she left something behind. James turned to see Patricia holding the crayon drawing, its bright colors somehow managing to dominate the sophisticated neutrals of his office. "Throw it away." "Sir, I just thought." "Throw it away, Patricia." But after Patricia left, James found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. The drawing haunted him, not just the image itself, but what it represented. A child who had seen him as someone capable of kindness, someone who belonged in a family picture, someone who could choose to help instead of hurt. He tried to push the encounter from his mind, tried to focus on the Tokyo deal and the quarterly projections and the 100 other details that made up his carefully managed world. But Sofia's words echoed in the silence of his office. "I thought maybe if you knew about us, you would want to help instead of hurt. For the first time in years, James Harrison felt the weight of his choices as more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Somewhere in the city below, a woman named Maria Santos was looking for work to support her daughter. Somewhere, a 7-year-old girl was learning that the world was less fair than she had believed. And somewhere in his own chest, something that he had thought was permanently buried was beginning to stir back to life. But acknowledging that stirring felt dangerous, felt like opening a door he had sealed shut for good reasons. So instead, James Harrison did what he had always done when emotions threatened his equilibrium. He worked late into the night, making decisions and moving money and building walls that were higher and stronger than ever before. The crayon drawing lay in Patricia's wastebasket, but the image of 3 stick figures under a rainbow had already burned itself into a place where no amount of professional detachment could erase it. 24 hours later, Maria Santos was still job hunting. Sofia was back in school trying to pretend her heart wasn't broken, and James Harrison was discovering that some encounters leave marks that can't be simply discarded with the day's trash. The collision had happened. Now came the aftermath. 3 days had passed since Sofia's visit to the 47th floor, and James Harrison had convinced himself that life had returned to normal. The quarterly projections were on track, the Tokyo deal was progressing smoothly, and the brief disruption caused by one small girl had been filed away in the same mental compartment where he stored all inconvenient emotions. But normal, James was discovering, was more fragile than he had imagined. It was 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday when his phone rang with a call that would shatter his carefully reconstructed equilibrium. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, and his first instinct was to let Patricia handle it. But something, perhaps the memory of a 7-year-old's tears, made him answer. James Harrison. Mr. Harrison? This is Riverside Elementary School. We have a Sofia Santos here, and you're listed as one of her emergency contacts. James's pen stopped moving across the contract he had been reviewing. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I don't know anyone named Sofia Santos. Sir, according to our records, you were added to Sofia's emergency contact list 3 days ago. Her mother, Maria Santos, listed you as a family friend. Sofia is in our nurse's office with a high fever, and we can't reach her mother. We need someone to pick her up immediately. The world seemed to tilt sideways. James stared out his window at the city below, his mind racing through the implications of what he was hearing. Maria Santos, the cleaner he had fired. Sofia Santos, the little girl who had stood in his office with a crayon drawing and a heart full of hope. And somehow, impossibly, he was listed as their emergency contact. Sir, are you there? James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a decision he hadn't asked to make settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. What's the address? Underscore 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 underscore. Riverside Elementary School occupied a modest brick building in a neighborhood where hope and struggle walked hand in hand down tree-lined streets. James Harrison's black Mercedes looked as out of place in the school parking lot as a tuxedo at a playground, drawing curious glances from teachers and parents who recognized expensive things when they saw them. James had never been inside an elementary school as an adult. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and childhood, that particular mixture of markers and milk cartons, and the indefinable scent of young dreams taking shape. Student artwork covered the walls in explosive bursts of color and creativity, and James found himself thinking of another drawing, one that currently lay buried in his office wastebasket. The nurse's office was a small, cheerful room with cartoon characters on the walls and a single bed where Sofia lay curled under a thin blanket, her face flushed with fever and her dark eyes glassy with illness. She looked impossibly small and vulnerable, and seeing her like this sent an unexpected jolt of protective instinct through James's chest. Mrs. Chun, the school nurse, greeted him with the professional warmth of someone accustomed to dealing with worried adults. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for coming so quickly. Sofia's temperature is 102.3, and she's been asking for her mama. We've tried calling Maria Santos multiple times, but her phone goes straight to voicemail." James approached the bed where Sofia lay, and her fever-bright eyes focused on him with confusion and something that might have been hope. "Mr. Harrison, are you here to take me home?" The trust in her voice, despite everything that had happened between them, hit James like a physical blow. Here was a child who was sick and scared and still somehow believed that he might be someone worth trusting, someone who would take care of her when she needed it most. James began, then stopped. What was he supposed to say? That he was only here because of a bureaucratic error? That he had no business being her emergency contact? That he was the last person qualified to take care of a 7-year-old with a fever? "My mama's looking for a new job," Sofia said, her voice thick with congestion and exhaustion. "She turns off her phone during interviews so it doesn't ring and make her look unprofessional. She taught me that word, unprofessional. It means when you're not acting like a grown-up should act." The implicit accusation in her innocent words wasn't lost on James. He had acted unprofessionally in the truest sense, not according to business standards, but according to the deeper standard of how humans should treat other humans. Mrs. Chun checked her watch with the expression of someone managing multiple sick children and limited resources. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask, are you comfortable taking Sofia home? Her fever needs to be monitored, and she should see a doctor if it doesn't come down in the next few hours." James looked down at Sofia, who was watching him with the kind of hope that seemed dangerous to disappoint twice. In his world of calculated risks and measured outcomes, this moment felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. But somehow, the alternative, walking away from a sick child who had no one else, felt like something that would fundamentally change who he was, and not in a way he could live with. "Yes," he heard himself saying. "I'll take care of her. Underscore 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 underscore. The ride to the hospital was a surreal experience for James Harrison, who had never transported anyone smaller than an adult CEO in his Mercedes. Sofia sat buckled into the back seat, her small frame dwarfed by the leather interior, occasionally giving directions in a voice made gravelly by fever. "My mama always takes me to St. Mary's Emergency," she said as they navigated through afternoon traffic. "The doctors there know about our insurance. Well, our almost insurance. Mama says we're between insurances right now." James felt another crack form in the armor of his assumptions. In his world, insurance was automatic, healthcare was a given, and illness was an inconvenience rather than a financial crisis. The casual way Sofia mentioned being between insurances spoke to a reality he had never had to consider. "Are you going to call my mama?" Sofia asked, her head resting against the window. "We'll try to reach her from the hospital," James said, though he had no idea how to contact Maria Santos. His security staff had her information from her employment records, but those seemed like pieces from another life, a time when she was just a number on a termination list rather than the mother of a sick child sitting in his car. At St. Mary's emergency room, James discovered another world he had never inhabited. The waiting room was filled with people who measured time not in quarterly profits but in hours of pain, parents holding feverish children, elderly individuals clutching insurance cards like lifelines. The fluorescent lighting was harsh and institutional, and the smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the underlying sense of worry and human need. James approached the registration desk feeling like an imposter in his tailored suit and Italian shoes. "I need to register Sofia Santos for medical care." The intake nurse, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, began the routine questions. Insurance information. James had no idea. Previous medical history? He knew nothing about Sofia beyond her name and her mother's occupation. Emergency contact information? He was supposedly the emergency contact, but he couldn't provide any of the details that mattered. Sir, are you Sofia's father? No, I'm. James paused, realizing he had no adequate description for what he was. I'm a friend of the family. Sofia, slumped in a waiting room chair with her fever making her drowsy, spoke up in a voice that carried across the registration area. He's the man who fired my mama, but he came to take care of me anyway. The words landed in the busy emergency room like stones in still water, creating ripples of attention from other waiting patients. James felt heat rise in his cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the recognition that a 7-year-old had just summarized the complex moral equation of his presence here with devastating accuracy. The intake nurse looked between James and Sofia with the expression of someone who had seen enough of life to know that human relationships rarely fit into neat categories. Well, she said finally, let's get Sofia seen by a doctor, and we'll figure out the paperwork as we go. Underscore 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 underscore. The pediatric examination room was designed to be comforting to children. Walls painted with cheerful animals, a small table with coloring books, and a chair sized for worried parents. James sat in that chair feeling like Alice after falling down the rabbit hole, trying to make sense of a world that operated by completely different rules than the one he knew. Sofia lay on the examination table, her fever having climbed to 103.1, and submitted to the doctor's examination with the stoic patience of a child who had learned not to complain about things beyond her control. Dr. Martinez, a young pediatrician with gentle hands and a warm smile, conducted her examination while keeping up a steady stream of conversation designed to keep Sofia at ease. Sofia tells me you work in a very tall building, Dr. Martinez said to James as she checked Sofia's throat. She says you make important decisions from way up high. Something like that, James replied, watching as Sofia winced during the throat examination. She also says you have an office that her mama keeps very clean, and that you have a view of the whole city from your window. James felt the weight of Sofia's innocent observations settling around him like a net. Through her eyes, his position of power wasn't about quarterly profits or stock prices. It was about having a view of the whole city, about being someone who could see everything and therefore should care about everything. Sofia, Dr. Martinez said gently, you have what we call strep throat. It's making you feel sick, but we can give you medicine to make you better. The medicine needs to be taken exactly the way I tell you, and you need lots of rest and fluids. She turned to James with the assumption that he was the responsible adult in the equation. She'll need to stay home from school for at least 24 hours after starting the antibiotics. Someone needs to monitor her fever and make sure she's drinking enough fluids. Do you have any questions about her care? James stared at the prescription slip Dr. Martinez handed him, the words blurring slightly as the magnitude of what he had somehow agreed to settled in his mind. He was holding medical instructions for a child he barely knew, whose mother he had fired, whose trust he had shattered just days before. And yet here he was, apparently responsible for her recovery. Mr. Harrison? Sofia's voice was small and tired. Are you going to take me home now? Home. James realized he had no idea where Sofia and Maria lived, no idea what their apartment looked like, no concept of the world beyond the cleaning supplies and night shifts that had defined his understanding of Maria Santos. But looking down at Sofia's fever-bright eyes, he knew that figuring it out wasn't optional. Yes, he said, the word coming out steadier than he felt. I'm going to take you home. As they left the hospital with a prescription for antibiotics and instructions for care, James Harrison found himself in the strange position of being responsible for someone other than himself for the first time in years. Sofia dozed against his shoulder as they waited for the pharmacy to fill her prescription, her small hand unconsciously gripping his suit jacket as if he were an anchor in her feverish confusion. For a man who had spent years building walls between himself and human need, the weight of one 6-7-year-old was proving to be more powerful than any corporate merger or hostile takeover he had ever navigated. And somewhere in the city, Maria Santos was finishing a job interview, completely unaware that the man who had fired her was sitting in a hospital pharmacy, learning what it meant to be needed by someone who had every reason not to trust him. Sometimes the universe forces us into situations we never planned for. Have you ever found yourself caring for someone you thought you had nothing in common with? What do you think changes when we stop seeing people as strangers and start seeing them as our responsibility? The address Sofia gave him led James Harrison into a part of the city he had only seen from 47 floors above. Neighborhoods where hope and struggle shared the same apartment buildings, where children played in small courtyards between towering structures, and where the American dream was measured not in stock options, but in the ability to keep the lights on another month. Sofia dozed in the passenger seat as James navigated the Mercedes through streets that grew narrower and more crowded with each turn. The buildings here were older, their brick facades telling stories of families who had worked and loved and dreamed within their walls for generations. Laundry hung from fire escapes like colorful flags of perseverance, and corner stores advertised services in 3 languages, catering to communities that had crossed oceans to find their piece of hope in America. "That's my building," Sofia mumbled through her fever, pointing to a 6-story brick structure with a small courtyard where a few determined flowers bloomed in carefully tended window boxes. "We live on the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. The stairs are hard when you're sick, but Mama always carries me if I need her to." James parked the Mercedes on the street, suddenly conscious of how the luxury vehicle stood out among the modest cars and public transportation that served this neighborhood. He helped Sofia out of the car, her small hand burning with fever as it gripped his, and together they approached the building that had been her whole world. The lobby was small but clean, with mailboxes that bore names from every corner of the globe: Rodriguez, Kim, Patel, O'Brien. A testament to the American tapestry that James had forgotten existed beyond the homogeneous corridors of corporate America. Sofia fumbled for her key with hands made clumsy by illness, and James found himself taking it from her, opening the door to apartment 3B with the strange sensation of crossing a threshold into a life he had never imagined. The apartment was tiny, perhaps 600 square feet, that had been arranged with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that every inch mattered. But what struck James immediately wasn't the size, it was the warmth. Every surface spoke of love and attention, from the hand-sewn curtains that turned the small windows into portals of light, to the carefully arranged books on shelves made from planks and cinder blocks, to the photographs that covered one entire wall like a gallery of joy. "Mama made those curtains herself," Sofia said, noticing James's attention. "She said store-bought ones cost too much, but homemade ones have love sewn right into the fabric." James looked around the living room that served multiple purposes: dining area, study space, entertainment center, all contained in a space smaller than his private bathroom at the office. A small table near the window held Sofia's homework, organized in neat stacks next to a cup of pencils that had been sharpened to perfect points. A couch that had seen better years was covered with a colorful blanket that looked hand-knitted, and throw pillows that had been carefully arranged to hide the worn spots. But it was the wall of photographs that drew James like a magnet. Dozens of pictures told the story of Sofia's life. Birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes, school events where Maria beamed with pride, holidays marked not with expensive gifts but with experiences and laughter. In every picture, Maria's love for her daughter radiated like sunlight, transforming modest celebrations into treasured memories. "That's my mama at my school play," Sofia said, following his gaze to a photo of Maria in the front row of what looked like a school auditorium, her face glowing with pride as she watched Sofia on stage. "She took off work to come see me be a butterfly. She said some things are more important than money." James studied the photograph, seeing Maria Santos not as the efficient night cleaner who had once polished his office, but as a mother whose world revolved around her daughter's happiness. In the picture, Maria wore what was clearly her best dress. Not expensive, but clean and pressed and worn with the dignity of someone who understood that showing up was its own form of love. "She looks beautiful," James said quietly, and realized he meant it. Sofia smiled through her fever. "Mama says beautiful is as beautiful does. She says it doesn't matter what you look like if you have an ugly heart, but if you have a beautiful heart, it shows on your face." The observation hit James with unexpected force. When had he last considered the beauty of anyone's heart? When had he last looked beyond the surface of efficiency and productivity to see the human being underneath? Sofia was beginning to sway on her feet, the fever and exhaustion taking their toll. "Can I lie down on my bed? I feel really sick." "Of course," James said, following her down a narrow hallway to a bedroom that was clearly shared between mother and daughter. The room was small but organized with military precision. A double bed took up most of the space, covered with a quilt that looked handmade, its colors bright and cheerful despite the obvious age of the fabric. One side of the room was clearly Sofia's, a small desk made from a board and two sawhorses, walls covered with her artwork and school certificates, a bookshelf filled with library books, and a few treasured volumes that showed the wear of multiple readings. The other side belonged to Maria, a small dresser with a mirror that reflected the room's natural light, a few personal items arranged with care, and a framed photograph of a young man in military dress uniform that James realized must be Sofia's father. "That's my daddy," Sofia said, noticing James's attention as she climbed into bed. "He was a soldier, but he died when I was 3. Mama says he's watching over us from heaven, and that's why I need to be brave and smart and kind, so he'll be proud of me." James felt something twist in his chest as he looked at the photograph of a young man who would never see his daughter grow up, never walk her down the aisle, never know the remarkable little girl she was becoming. "He would be very proud of you," James said, and meant it. As Sofia settled under the covers, James took in more details of the room that spoke to the depth of Maria's sacrifices. The few clothes in the open closet were clearly divided, Sofia's school uniforms and play clothes taking up the majority of the space, while Maria's belongings occupied a small corner. Everything was clean and mended, cared for with the attention of someone who understood that when you have little, you must treasure what you have. On Maria's bedside table sat a small stack of bills, and James couldn't help but notice the notices that spoke of financial pressure. Past due stamps on utility bills, a notice from the school about lunch money, a letter from a credit card company that looked ominous even from a distance. "Mama puts me to bed every night and tells me a story," Sofia said, her voice growing drowsy as the medicine began to take effect. "Sometimes she makes them up, about princesses who are really smart and save kingdoms with their brains instead of waiting for princes. Sometimes she tells me stories about Daddy, about how brave he was and how much he loved us." James sat in the small chair beside the bed, feeling like an intruder in this sanctuary of love and sacrifice. "What's your favorite story?" Sofia's eyes were beginning to close, but she smiled sleepily. "The one about the princess who works really hard to make everything beautiful for other people, even when they don't notice. And then one day, someone does notice, and they realize that the princess was the most important person in the whole kingdom all along." The words hit James like a physical blow. In her child's way, Sofia had just told him the story of her mother, a woman who worked through the night to make his world beautiful, whose value he had reduced to a line item on a budget sheet, whose worth he had dismissed without ever seeing the kingdom of love she had built from determination and sacrifice. As Sofia drifted off to sleep, James found himself wandering back to the living room, seeing it now with different eyes. The hand-sewn curtains weren't just cost-saving measures, they were declarations of love. The carefully arranged photographs weren't just decorations, they were testimonies to joy found in simple moments. The organized homework station wasn't just practical, it was a mother's investment in her daughter's future. On the small kitchen counter, he found a notebook that had fallen open, and couldn't help but see Maria's handwriting, a budget written in careful columns that revealed the mathematical precision required to survive on limited income. Rent, $850. Utilities, $120. Groceries, $200. Transportation, $80. Every expense accounted for, every dollar allocated with the careful attention of someone who understood that a single miscalculation could mean disaster. At the bottom of the page, in Maria's neat script, was a line that made James's breath catch. Sofia's college fund, $15. $15. Saved from a budget that barely covered survival. Set aside for a future that seemed impossibly distant, but was still worth hoping for. James sank into the worn couch, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with grace under pressure, and felt the full weight of what he had done settling on his shoulders like a stone. He had fired a woman who saved $15 a month for her daughter's education. He had eliminated the job of someone who worked multiple shifts to keep her child in a good school. He had reduced to a number on a spreadsheet someone who had built a kingdom of love from nothing more than determination and hope. For the first time in years, James Harrison felt ashamed. Not the professional embarrassment of a failed business deal, but the deep, soul-level shame that comes from recognizing that you have failed as a human being. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "How is your afternoon meeting going? The Tokyo calls are scheduled for 5 p.m. Tokyo calls, board meetings, quarterly projections. The world he had left behind suddenly seemed not just distant, but meaningless. How could he sit in his glass office making decisions about profit margins when he had seen the real cost of those decisions, sleeping under a handmade quilt in a shared bedroom? Another text from Patricia. Also, facilities wants to know if you approve the cleaning service changes. The night shift supervisor is asking about the Santos termination paperwork. James stared at the text, the corporate language feeling foreign and cold. The Santos termination paperwork. As if Maria Santos was just paperwork to be processed, rather than a woman who had lost the job that allowed her to save $15 a month for her daughter's future. From the bedroom came the sound of Sofia coughing in her sleep, and James found himself getting up to check on her, adjusting the blanket around her small form with a gentleness he hadn't known he possessed. In sleep, with her fever-flushed cheeks and tangled hair, she looked even younger than 7, vulnerable and trusting in a way that made his chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. On the bedside table, he noticed a small journal with Sofia's name on the cover, and despite knowing he shouldn't, he found himself opening it to a page that had been marked with a ribbon bookmark. "Dear Diary, today Mama cried when she thought I was asleep. She was looking at papers on the kitchen table, and her shoulders were shaking. I wanted to help, but I don't know how to fix grown-up problems. I wish I was bigger, so I could take care of Mama like she takes care of me. I'm going to be extra good and not ask for anything, so maybe she won't be sad anymore." The entry was dated the day after Maria had been fired. James closed the journal with shaking hands, the innocent words hitting him like hammer blows. Sofia had been watching her mother's pain, had been trying to protect Maria even as her own world crumbled. A 7-year-old child was carrying the weight of adult worries because the man who could have prevented it all had chosen to see numbers instead of people. As afternoon faded into evening, James Harrison sat in a small apartment that contained more real wealth than his penthouse ever had, watching over a sick child whose trust he didn't deserve and finally understanding the true cost of the choices he had made. When Maria Santos came home from her job interviews, she was going to find the man who had fired her sitting in her living room, holding the prescription for her daughter's medicine, and carrying the weight of revelations that had fundamentally changed everything he thought he knew about success, responsibility, and what it meant to be human. Have you ever discovered that someone you dismissed was actually someone extraordinary? Sometimes our biggest mistakes become our greatest teachers. What do you think James has learned about the difference between having wealth and being rich? The sound of keys jingling in the hallway at 6:47 p.m. sent James's heart racing with an anxiety he hadn't felt since his first board presentation. He had spent the past 3 hours in Maria Santos's living room, watching Sofia sleep and coming to terms with the magnitude of his misconceptions. Now, as footsteps approached apartment 3B, he realized he had no script for this moment, no corporate training that had prepared him for explaining why the man who had fired a single mother was now sitting in her home, caring for her sick daughter. The door opened, and Maria stepped inside carrying a folder of job applications and wearing the carefully maintained composure of someone who had spent the day convincing strangers that she was worth hiring. Her professional demeanor dissolved the instant she saw James Harrison sitting on her couch, his expensive suit incongruous against the hand-knitted throw pillows. "What are you doing here?" The words came out sharp with alarm, not anger, the tone of a mother whose first thought was for her child's safety. "Where's Sofia?" "She's sleeping," James said quickly, rising from the couch with his hands raised in a gesture of non-threat. "She's okay. She has strep throat, but she's been given antibiotics and—" Strep throat. Maria dropped her folder and rushed toward the bedroom, her maternal instincts overriding any confusion about James's presence. James followed at a respectful distance, watching as Maria transformed from the composed job candidate into a mother checking her child's forehead with practiced efficiency. Sofia stirred at her mother's touch, opening fever-bright eyes that immediately sought her mama's face. "Mama, you're home. Mr. Harrison took me to the doctor. He stayed with me all day." Maria's eyes moved between her daughter and James, trying to process information that didn't fit any scenario she could have imagined. "Mija, how did Mr. Harrison know you were sick?" "The school called me," James said from the doorway. "I was listed as an emergency contact. When they couldn't reach you, they called me instead." Maria's confusion deepened. "That's impossible. I never listed you as—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as understanding dawned. "Sofia, what did you do?" Sofia had the grace to look embarrassed, even through her fever. "I might have told Mrs. Martinez that Mr. Harrison was our friend. After I visited his office, I thought maybe if something happened to me, he might help because I asked him to." Maria sank into the small chair beside Sofia's bed, the weight of her daughter's innocent manipulation settling around her like a lead blanket. "Sofia, you can't just tell people that someone is our emergency contact. Mr. Harrison is a very busy man. He doesn't have time to—" "Actually," James interrupted, "I'm glad she did." Both Maria and Sofia turned to look at him, surprise written across their faces. James struggled to find words that could convey the transformation he had undergone in the past few hours without sounding patronizing or insincere. "I've been sitting in your home for 3 hours," he said quietly, "and I've learned more about what really matters than I've learned in the past 10 years of running a company." Maria's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. "Mr. Harrison, I don't understand what you're trying to say." "I'm trying to say that I made a terrible mistake. Not just in firing you, but in never seeing you. In never understanding what kind of person you are, what kind of mother you are, what kind of life you've built here." James gestured around the small bedroom with its carefully arranged treasures and evidence of love. "I've spent the afternoon looking at your photographs, seeing how you've raised Sofia, understanding what it means to save $15 for a college fund when every penny matters. I've read Sofia's diary entry about watching you cry and wanting to take care of you. I've seen what real strength looks like, and it doesn't look anything like what I thought it did." Maria's eyes narrowed with the protective skepticism of someone who had learned to be cautious about people who discovered her worth only after damaging her life. "Mr. Harrison, if you're here because you feel guilty, I don't need your pity. Sofia and I will be fine. We always are." "This isn't pity," James said, then paused, realizing he needed to be more honest than he had been with anyone in years. "Or maybe it started as pity, but it's become something else. It's become respect. And shame. And the recognition that I've spent so many years focused on profit margins that I forgot what business is really supposed to be about, taking care of people." Sofia, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand grown-up emotions, spoke up in her hoarse voice. "Are you going to give Mama her job back?" The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. James looked at Maria, seeing the pride warring with desperation in her eyes, the careful dignity that refused to beg even when begging might solve everything. "I want to do more than that," James said. "But first, I need to ask your mother's forgiveness for treating her like a number instead of a person, for making a decision that hurt you both without ever considering what it would cost." Maria studied his face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read sincerity in the expressions of people who held her family's fate in their hands. "Mr. Harrison, I worked for Harrison Industries for 2 years. I cleaned your office every night. I never missed a shift, never did anything less than my best work. But you never once spoke to me, never acknowledged that I existed. Why should I believe that anything has changed just because you've spent one afternoon in my apartment?" The question was fair, and James knew it. He had no right to expect trust from someone he had treated as invisible. But he also knew that this moment was more important than any business negotiation he had ever conducted, because the stakes weren't quarterly profits. They were the future of a woman who deserved better, and a child who still believed the world could be fair. "Because," James said, his voice carrying a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades, 3 hours ago, "I thought success meant making the hard choices without getting emotionally involved. Now I understand that success means making sure the choices you make don't destroy something beautiful." He moved closer to Sofia's bed, addressing his words to both mother and daughter. "Your home is beautiful, not because of what it costs, but because of what it contains. Love and sacrifice and hope and dignity. I've never seen anything like it, and I destroyed part of it without even realizing what I was taking away." Sofia reached out with a small, fever-warm hand and touched James's arm. "Mr. Harrison, are you sad?" The innocent question broke something open in James's chest. When was the last time anyone had asked him about his emotions? When was the last time he had allowed himself to feel sad about anything other than missed profits or failed deals? "Yes, Sofia. I'm very sad. I'm sad that I hurt your mama. I'm sad that I made you cry. I'm sad that it took this long for me to see what should have been obvious from the beginning." Maria's expression began to soften, though her guard remained up. "What do you want from us, Mr. Harrison?" "I want to make it right," James said. "I want to give you back your job. But more than that, I want to create a position that recognizes your real value. I want to help with Sofia's medical bills. I want to—" He stopped, realizing how his words might sound like charity to a woman who had fought for everything she had. "You want to what?" Maria prompted. "I want to be the kind of person Sofia thought I was when she drew that picture of the 3 of us under a rainbow," James said quietly. "Someone who belongs in your story. Someone who helps instead of hurts." Sofia struggled to sit up in bed, her fever making her movements slow, but her expression bright with hope. "Mama, remember how you told me that sometimes people make mistakes because they don't understand, but if you explain things to them, they might change their minds?" Maria looked at her daughter, then at James, and for the first time since she had walked into her apartment to find him there, her expression held something other than wariness. "You really stayed with her all day? Took her to the hospital, got her medicine?" "I did," James said, "and I want to do more. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because in one afternoon, Sofia taught me more about courage and love than I've learned in 43 years of life." Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing the impossible situation of the man who had fired her now asking for the chance to be part of their lives. Finally, she spoke with the careful consideration of someone making a decision that could change everything. "Mr. Harrison, Sofia needs to eat something with her medicine, and I need to make dinner. If you really want to help, you can stay and we can talk about what making it right actually means. But I need you to understand something. Sofia and I are not a charity case. We're a family. If you want to be part of our story, it has to be because you see us as equals, not because you see us as people who need rescuing." James felt a smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile he had experienced in longer than he could remember. "I would be honored to stay for dinner. And Maria, you're right. You don't need rescuing. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm the one who needs help, help remembering what it means to be human. As Maria moved to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal, and Sofia dozed fitfully in her bed, James Harrison found himself in the unfamiliar position of being useful in a domestic setting. He helped Sofia take her medicine, brought her water, and read to her from one of her library books while Maria cooked. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stock prices or board meetings or quarterly projections. He was thinking about a little girl who needed to get better, a mother who deserved better than she had been given, and the possibility that it wasn't too late to become the kind of person who added value to the world in ways that couldn't be measured in profit margins. The evening ahead held conversations that would change everything, about jobs and futures, and the kind of partnership that could grow between people who had learned to see each other clearly. But for now, as the smell of Maria's cooking filled the small apartment and Sofia's fever began to break, James Harrison was discovering what it felt like to be exactly where he belonged. Sometimes the people we think need our help are actually the ones who can teach us the most. Have you ever found that trying to help someone else ended up helping you more than you expected? What do you think happens when we stop trying to rescue people and start trying to understand them? 2 weeks had passed since the evening James Harrison stayed for dinner in apartment 3B, and the fragile bond between him and the Santos family had grown stronger with each careful interaction. Sofia had recovered from her strep throat and returned to school with stories about Mr. James that made her teacher smile. Maria had been offered a new position at Harrison Industries, not as a night cleaner, but as facilities coordinator, with a salary that would allow her to save more than $15 a month for Sofia's future. James had thought he was handling the delicate process of making amends with sensitivity and respect. He had been wrong. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning when Maria arrived at the Harrison Industries building for her second week in her new position. She had spent the weekend apartment hunting, finally able to consider places with more than one bedroom, places where Sofia could have her own space and Maria could stop sharing a bed with her 7-year-old daughter. The possibility of a larger life had felt like a door opening onto sunlight after years in shadows. But as Maria approached the building, she saw Elena Rodriguez from her old neighborhood standing near the employee entrance, her face a mixture of excitement and confusion. "Maria, I can't believe it. You look so professional." Elena embraced her friend, then stepped back to study Maria's new clothes, a modest but professional outfit that James had insisted the company provide as part of her position. "I heard you got a big promotion. That's amazing." "Thank you," Maria said, though something in Elena's expression made her cautious. "It's been a good change for Sofia and me." "That's what I don't understand," Elena said, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone that neighborhood gossip required. "Carmen Vasquez works in the Harrison Industries accounting department, and she told me something very strange. She said your promotion came with a direct order from the CEO himself, that he specifically requested you be given special treatment, that there was something about emergency assistance funds and medical bill coverage." Maria felt her stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "Carmen said there was a memo about providing you with extra support, clothing allowance, expedited health insurance, even help with housing deposits. She said it was unusual, like someone upstairs was taking special care of you." Elena's expression grew concerned. "Maria, people are talking. They're saying maybe you have some kind of special relationship with someone important." The words hit Maria like ice water. In her neighborhood, in her world, there was only one reason why a powerful man would single out a woman for special treatment, and it had nothing to do with her qualifications or worth as an employee. "That's not true," Maria said, but even as she spoke, pieces began falling into place. The job offer that had come so quickly, the salary that was higher than she had expected, the way James had insisted on covering Sofia's medical bills, on providing her with professional clothes, on making everything easier for her transition. Had she been naive? Had she misread his intentions entirely? Elena touched her arm gently. "Maria, I'm not judging you. God knows we all do what we have to do to take care of our children. But people are talking, and I thought you should know." Maria spent the rest of the morning in her new office, trying to focus on facilities schedules and maintenance reports while Elena's words echoed in her mind. Every kindness James had shown, every gesture of support, suddenly took on a different cast when viewed through the lens of neighborhood speculation. When her phone buzzed with a text from James, "How's your first week going? Would you like to grab lunch to discuss the community outreach program ideas?" Maria stared at the message with new eyes. Was this about work? Or was she being asked on a date by a man who had systematically positioned himself as her benefactor? The afternoon grew worse when Patricia appeared at her office door with a smile that carried just a hint of knowledge that made Maria's skin crawl. "Maria, Mr. Harrison asked me to give you this," Patricia said, handing over an envelope. "He said it was to help with any moving expenses as you transition to your new position." Inside the envelope was a check for $3,000 and a note in James's handwriting. "For Sofia's future. You shouldn't have to worry about deposits and moving costs on top of everything else. J." Maria stared at the check, seeing it now not as generosity, but as something that confirmed every ugly suspicion that Elena's words had planted in her mind. $3,000. More money than she made in 2 months at her old job. The kind of money that men gave to women when they expected something in return. She thought about the evening James had stayed for dinner, about the way he had looked at her as she cooked, about his insistence on helping with Sofia's care. Had she misread his motives? Had his guilt about firing her transformed into something else? Something that reduced her to a different kind of transaction? By the time James knocked on her office door at 5 p.m., Maria had worked herself into a state of humiliated fury that had been building all day. "Maria, I was hoping we could talk about the lunch meeting. I have some ideas about the community outreach program that I think you'd—" "I can't accept this," Maria said, standing abruptly and holding out the envelope with the check. "I won't accept this." James looked confused, his expression shifting from casual friendliness to concern. "Accept what? Maria, what's wrong?" "The money. The special treatment. The way you've arranged everything to make me dependent on your generosity." Maria's voice was steady, but James could see the tremor in her hands as she held the envelope toward him. "I know what people are saying about us. About why you really gave me this job." Understanding dawned in James's eyes, followed immediately by something that looked like pain. "Maria, that's not, whatever people are saying, it's not true. The job offer was based on your qualifications. The salary is appropriate for the position, and the money for moving expenses is just practical support to help you." "Help me what?" Maria interrupted, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain control. "Help me be grateful? Help me feel obligated? Help me forget that you fired me in the first place. Help you build a better life for Sofia," James said, his own voice growing heated. "Help you not have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Help you not have to work 3 jobs just to survive. By making me your charity case?" Maria's words came out like accusations. "By having your assistant hand me envelopes of money like I'm some kind of kept woman?" The phrase hung in the air between them like a slap. James's face went pale, and Maria immediately regretted the words, but she couldn't take them back. The damage was done, the ugly truth of what she feared he saw her as finally spoken aloud. "Is that really what you think of me?" James asked quietly. "Is that what you think this has been about?" Maria felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know if you see me as an employee or a project or something else. All I know is that I can't be in a position where people think I traded my dignity for my daughter's security. So you'd rather go back to working 3 jobs and sharing a bedroom with Sofia than accept help from someone who cares about you both?" "Yes." The word came out fiercer than Maria had intended. "Yes, I would rather struggle with my dignity intact than live comfortably while people whisper about what I had to do to get there." James stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through hurt, frustration, and something that looked like recognition. "You're right," he said finally. "I handled this wrong. I was so focused on fixing the damage I had done that I didn't consider how my help might look to other people. I didn't think about how it might affect your reputation. It's not just about my reputation, Maria said, though her voice had lost some of its anger. It's about Sofia. What kind of example am I setting for her if I teach her that the way to get ahead is to accept charity from powerful men? It's not charity, James said, but the word sounded weak even to himself. Isn't it? Maria challenged. Be honest with me, James. Would you have offered this job to any other night cleaner you fired? Would you have insisted on paying medical bills for any other employee's child? Would you have written personal checks for moving expenses for anyone else? James opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, because the truth was that no, he wouldn't have. Everything he had done for Maria and Sofia had been personal, motivated by his feelings for them, by his need to atone for the harm he had caused. But in making it personal, he had also made it suspect. I wanted to help, he said finally. I wanted to make things better for you and Sofia because you deserved better than what I gave you. Because you're extraordinary, and I was blind to it until it was almost too late. And I appreciate that, Maria said, her voice softer now but still firm. But I can't build my life on your guilt, James. I can't build Sofia's future on your need to feel better about your choices. We have to be able to stand on our own. Sofia's voice suddenly cut through the tension from the office doorway. Mama? Mr. James? Are you fighting? Both adults turned to see Sofia standing in the doorway, her school backpack on her shoulders and her face creased with worry. She had come straight from school to her mother's new office, as they had arranged, but instead of finding the happy workplace family she had imagined, she had walked into a confrontation that seemed to threaten everything good that had come into their lives. We're not fighting, Mija, Maria said quickly, moving toward her daughter. We're just discussing work things. But Sofia was 7, and 7-year-olds were experts at reading adult emotions. Are you going to fire Mama again? She asked James, her voice small and frightened. The question hit both adults like a physical blow. James knelt down to Sofia's level, his heart breaking at the fear in her eyes. No, Sofia. I would never fire your mama again. I promise you that. Then why do you both look so sad? James and Maria exchanged glances over Sofia's head, both recognizing that their adult complications were affecting the child who had brought them together in the first place. Sometimes, sweetheart, Maria said carefully, grown-ups have to make difficult decisions about what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes those decisions hurt, even when they're the right ones to make. Sofia looked between them with the wisdom that children sometimes possess in the face of adult confusion. Are you going to stop being friends? The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding honesty from both adults about what they had built together and what they were willing to sacrifice to protect their pride and principles. I don't know, Mija, Maria said finally, her voice heavy with the weight of choices that seemed to have no good answers. I really don't know. As they left the building together, Maria carrying the envelope of money she refused to accept, James watching them go with the knowledge that his good intentions had somehow become the very thing that might destroy the connection he had come to treasure. The fragile bond that had seemed so promising just hours before lay in pieces around them. Sometimes love meant letting go. Sometimes pride demanded sacrifice. And sometimes the very thing that brought people together became the thing that tore them apart. The question was whether this was an ending or just the difficult middle of a story that still had the possibility of redemption. When have you had to choose between accepting help and maintaining your dignity? Sometimes our desire to help others can accidentally hurt them in ways we never intended. How do we learn to help in ways that honor rather than diminish the people we care about? 5 days passed in silence. James Harrison sat in his corner office, staring out at the city that sprawled 47 floors below, and for the first time in his career, found himself unable to focus on anything that mattered to Harrison Industries. The Tokyo deal had closed successfully, the quarterly numbers were strong, and the board had praised his leadership in their morning meeting. By every measure that had once defined his life, he should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. The check for $3,000 sat in his desk drawer, uncashed and accusatory. Patricia had stopped asking about his lunch appointments with Maria. The community outreach program that had seemed so promising lay abandoned in a folder that reminded him daily of his failure to understand the difference between helping and healing. Each evening, he returned to his penthouse apartment, 2,800 square feet of designer furniture and panoramic views that felt more like a museum than a home. He would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the neighborhoods where families like the Santos lived, and wonder how he had managed to accumulate so much wealth while learning so little about what actually mattered. His phone contained 3 draft text messages to Maria, each one deleted before sending. What could he say? That he was sorry for caring about her and Sofia? That he was sorry for wanting to help? That he was sorry for being exactly the kind of privileged man who thought money could fix anything? The truth was more complicated and more painful. He wasn't sorry for caring. He was sorry for not understanding that caring and helping were 2 different things, and that one without the other could be worse than indifference. Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, in apartment 3B, Maria Santos was discovering that pride could be a cold companion during the long hours when Sofia was at school and she was alone with her thoughts. She had kept her job as facilities coordinator. James had honored his promise not to fire her again, even though their professional interactions had become painfully formal. She received her paycheck, performed her duties with characteristic excellence, and maintained the careful distance that protected both their reputations and her dignity. But the salary from her new position, while better than her cleaning wages, wasn't enough to afford the apartment with 2 bedrooms that she had briefly allowed herself to imagine. Sofia was back to sharing the double bed, though she never complained. Children, Maria had learned, were remarkably adaptable to the disappointments of the adult world. What was harder to adapt to was Sofia's questions. Mama, why doesn't Mr. James come for dinner anymore? Mama, did I do something wrong when I made him my emergency contact? Mama, are you sad because you miss him? That last question had stopped Maria in her tracks while she was folding laundry on a Saturday morning. Are you sad because you miss him? Out of the mouths of babes came the truths that adults spent enormous energy avoiding. Yes, she missed him. She missed the way he had looked at Sofia with genuine affection, the way he had listened to stories about her day with the attention of someone who actually cared about the answer. She missed the conversations they had begun to have about the community outreach program, the way his eyes lit up when she shared ideas about helping other struggling families. She missed feeling like she had a partner in the overwhelming task of building a future for her daughter. But missing someone and being able to trust them were different things. And Maria had learned too many hard lessons about the cost of depending on people who saw her as a project rather than a person. Underscore 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 underscore. The turning point came on a Wednesday evening when Sofia's school called with news that would force both adults to confront the choice they had been avoiding. Mrs. Santos, this is Principal Williams from Riverside Elementary. I'm calling about Sofia's essay for the Community Heroes Project. Maria felt her stomach tighten with the familiar anxiety that came with any unexpected call from school. Is there a problem? Not a problem, exactly, but I think you should know what Sofia wrote about. She chose to write about someone she considers a community hero, and, well, perhaps you should come in to discuss it. An hour later, Maria sat in Principal Williams's office, reading Sofia's essay with a mixture of pride and heartbreak that made her chest tight with emotion. My Community Hero by Sofia Santos. A community hero is someone who helps people even when it's hard. My community hero is Mr. James Harrison. Most people think he's just a rich man in a tall building, but I know the truth about him. Mr. James fired my mama from her cleaning job, which was a bad thing to do. But then he learned about us and realized he made a mistake. Instead of just saying sorry, he tried to fix it by taking care of me when I was sick and giving my mama a better job. But the most heroic thing about Mr. James isn't that he helped us. It's that he learned how to see us. My mama always says that the hardest thing in the world is to admit when you're wrong and then change your heart. Mr. James changed his heart. Now my mama and Mr. James don't talk anymore because grown-ups make things complicated. But I think real heroes are people who love you even when you can't love them back. Mr. James still makes sure my mama has a good job, even though she won't eat dinner with him anymore. That's what heroes do. They keep helping even when it hurts. I hope someday my mama and Mr. James remember that being a family isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard. Principal Williams watched Maria's face as she read, noting the tears that gathered in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain composure. Mrs. Santos, Sofia asked if she could invite Mr. Harrison to the Community Heroes presentation next Friday. She wants to read this essay aloud and have him there to hear it. I told her I would need to discuss it with you first. Maria stared at the essay, seeing her daughter's wisdom reflected in words that cut straight to the heart of everything she and James had been too proud or too hurt to say to each other. She wants him to be there. She does. And Mrs. Santos? I've been an educator for 22 years, and I've rarely seen a child express such insight about the complexity of human relationships. Sofia understands something about forgiveness and love that many adults never learn. That evening, Maria sat on the edge of the bed she shared with her daughter, watching Sofia complete her homework with the careful attention she brought to everything important in her life. Mija, Principal Williams told me about your essay. Sofia looked up from her math problems, her expression serious. Are you mad that I wrote about Mr. James? No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. But I want to understand why you chose him when there are so many other people you could have written about. Sofia set down her pencil and turned to face her mother fully. Because heroes aren't perfect, Mama. Heroes are people who make mistakes and then try to fix them. Mr. James made a mistake when he fired you, but then he tried to make it better. That's what heroes do. But Sofia, things between Mr. James and me are complicated. We don't agree about some important things. I know, Sofia said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had learned that adult relationships were rarely simple. But Mama, you taught me that love isn't about agreeing on everything. You taught me that love is about choosing to stay even when it's hard. Maria felt her breath catch at her own words reflected back to her through her daughter's understanding. What are you saying, Mija? I'm saying that Mr. James chose to stay and help us even after you told him to go away. And I'm saying that maybe you should choose to stay too, instead of being scared that people will think bad things about us. Out of the mouths of babes. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, after Sofia had fallen asleep, Maria sat at her small kitchen table with her daughter's essay spread before her, facing the choice that would define not just her own future, but the example she set for the little girl who was watching her navigate the complex terrain of pride, love, and forgiveness. She could continue as they were, safe in their small apartment, protected by the walls of independence she had built around their life, maintaining the careful distance that kept her dignity intact but her heart closed. Or she could take the risk that Sofia was asking her to take. The risk of believing that James's feelings for their family were genuine, that his help came from love rather than guilt, that she could accept partnership without sacrificing her strength. The choice wasn't really about James, she realized. It was about what kind of woman she wanted to be, what kind of mother she wanted Sofia to see. Did she want to teach her daughter that accepting love was weakness? Or did she want to teach her that accepting love even imperfect, complicated love, was actually the bravest thing a person could do? At 11:47 p.m., Maria picked up her phone and typed a message that would change everything. James, Sofia wrote an essay about community heroes. She chose you. The presentation is Friday at 2 p.m. at Riverside Elementary. She would like you to be there. If you come, we should probably talk first. Would you like to have coffee tomorrow morning? Maria. She stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. Underscore 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 underscore. Across the city, James was lying awake in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was what the rest of his life would look like. Professional success built on a foundation of personal emptiness, wealth that couldn't purchase the only things that mattered. When his phone buzzed with Maria's message, he read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Sofia had chosen him as her community hero. After everything that had gone wrong between him and Maria, after all the ways he had misunderstood what help should look like, a 7-year-old girl still believed he was worth calling a hero. The weight of that trust, that faith, that love settled in his chest like a warm light in the darkness. His response was simple. I would be honored to be there. And yes, let's talk. Thank you for giving me another chance. James. Tomorrow would bring a conversation that could heal what had been broken, or it could provide the closure they needed to move forward separately. Either way, it would bring honesty about intentions and fears, about love and pride, about what it meant to build something together that was stronger than what either of them could create alone. For the first time in 5 days, both James Harrison and Maria Santos fell asleep with hope instead of regret, knowing that sometimes the bravest choice is not the one that protects your heart, but the one that opens it to the possibility of something better than you ever imagined possible. The conversation that would determine their future was just hours away. The coffee shop Maria had chosen was neutral territory, a small cafe 3 blocks from Harrison Industries, frequented by office workers and neighborhood residents alike. It was the kind of place where a CEO and a facilities coordinator could meet without raising eyebrows, where their conversation could unfold without the weight of corporate hierarchy or personal history defining the space. James arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window where he could watch the morning bustle of people heading to work, to school, to lives that suddenly seemed more meaningful than the quarterly projections he had once lived for. When Maria walked through the door at exactly 8 a.m., he felt his breath catch at the sight of her. Professional but not pretentious, beautiful in the way that strength and dignity always were. Thank you for coming, Maria said as she sat down across from him, her voice carrying the careful formality of someone who wasn't sure yet what they were to each other. Thank you for asking me to, James replied. I wasn't sure I'd get another chance to explain myself, to apologize properly. Maria studied his face, looking for sincerity or manipulation, and finding only the vulnerability of a man who had learned painful lessons about the difference between helping and loving. James, before we talk about anything else, I need you to understand something. I don't regret standing up for my dignity. I don't regret refusing the money. I can't be in a relationship, professional or personal, where I'm seen as a charity case. I know, James said quietly, and you were right to refuse it. I was so focused on fixing what I had broken that I didn't think about how my help might look to other people, or how it might make you feel. I treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. Maria felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. But I also need to be honest about something. Sofia's essay made me realize that I was so afraid of being seen as weak that I might have been throwing away something real. Something good. James leaned forward slightly, hope flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 5 days thinking about what kind of example I want to set for Sofia. Do I want to teach her to be so afraid of what people think that she can't accept love when it's offered? Or do I want to teach her that love, real love, isn't about power or debt or charity? It's about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's complicated. Maria, James said, his voice thick with emotion, I need you to know that everything I did, the job offer, wanting to help with Sofia's medical bills, all of it, it came from caring about you both, not from guilt or obligation or anything else. You're not my charity case. You're the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met, and Sofia is the bravest, wisest child I've ever known. I don't want to help you because I think you need rescuing. I want to be part of your lives because you make mine better in every possible way. Maria felt tears threatening, but these were different from the angry tears of 5 days ago. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they had found their way back to each other. So what does that look like? She asked. How do we do this in a way that honors both of us? James had clearly thought about this question. It looks like partnership, real partnership. It looks like me contributing to Sofia's college fund not as charity, but as someone who loves her and wants to invest in her future. It looks like you accepting my help not because you need it, but because people who care about each other help each other. It looks like us building something together that's stronger than what either of us could build alone. And the gossip, the people who will say I'm only with you for your money. Let them talk, James said with a conviction that surprised them both. The people who matter will see what's real. And the people who don't see it, their opinions don't get to determine our happiness. Maria smiled, the first genuine smile James had seen from her since the day they had shared dinner in her apartment. Sofia is going to be so happy. She's been asking about you every day. I've missed her too, James admitted. I've missed both of you. These 5 days have been the longest of my life. So you'll come to the presentation on Friday? I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Underscore 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 underscore. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Riverside Elementary's multipurpose room had been transformed for the Community Heroes presentation, with folding chairs arranged in neat rows and a small stage decorated with student artwork. Parents, grandparents, and invited guests filled the space with the warm buzz of anticipation that accompanied school events. James Harrison sat in the third row, wearing a suit but looking more relaxed than he had in years. Maria sat beside him, no longer worried about what people might think of their presence together. In the front row, Bob the security guard had been given a place of honor. Sofia had insisted he be there, since he was the one who had helped her understand that sometimes brave people do scary things for love. When Sofia took the stage, she looked impossibly small behind the podium, but her voice carried clearly through the room as she began to read her essay. James felt his throat tighten as he listened to her words about heroes who admit their mistakes, about grown-ups who learn to change their hearts, about the difference between being perfect and being brave. But it was the ending that she had added since writing the original essay that brought tears to his eyes. I used to think that families had to look a certain way, with a mama and daddy who were married and lived in the same house. But now I know that families are made when people choose to love each other, even when it's hard. My mama and Mr. James chose each other, and they chose me, and that makes us a family even if we don't look like the families in picture books. My mama taught me that heroes aren't people who never make mistakes. Heroes are people who make mistakes and then spend the rest of their lives trying to do better. Mr. James made a mistake when he fired my mama, but then he spent every day after that trying to make it right. Not because he had to, but because that's what love does. It makes you want to be the best version of yourself. So my community hero is Mr. James Harrison, not because he's rich or powerful, but because he learned how to see us, really see us, and because he chose to stay, even when it was hard, and because he taught me that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into. The applause that followed was thunderous, but James barely heard it. All he could see was Sofia's radiant smile as she looked out at the audience and found his face, her expression glowing with the joy of someone who had successfully brought her family together through the power of words and love. After the presentation, as families gathered in the hallway for cookies and punch, Sofia ran straight to James and threw her arms around his waist with the uninhibited affection of a child who had never learned to guard her heart. "Did you like my essay?" she asked, looking up at him with eyes that sparkled with pride. "I loved it," James said, kneeling down to her level. "But Sofia, you know I'm not perfect, right? I'm going to make more mistakes." Sofia nodded solemnly. "I know. Mama makes mistakes too. But the difference between our family and other families is that when we make mistakes, we say sorry and we do better. That's what makes us strong." "Sofia," James said, his voice carrying the weight of a promise, "I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your hero. And your mama's. And if you'll have me, I'd like to be part of your family, really part of it. Not just for special occasions, but for homework help and sick days and grocery shopping and all the regular, ordinary, wonderful things that families do together." Sofia's smile could have powered the entire building. "Does that mean you want to marry my mama?" The question carried across the hallway with the clarity that only children's voices could achieve, causing several nearby conversations to pause as parents tried not to obviously eavesdrop on what was clearly a family moment. James looked up to find Maria watching them, her cheeks flushed but her eyes sparkling with amusement and something that looked very much like love. "Well," James said, loud enough for Maria to hear, "that depends on whether your mama thinks I'd make a good addition to the Santos family." "The Harrison Santos family," Sofia corrected with the authority of someone who had clearly given this considerable thought. "Because when you get married, both names go together. Like how peanut butter and jelly are both good by themselves, but better together." Maria laughed, a sound so beautiful that James felt it settle in his chest like music. She walked over to where they were kneeling and knelt down beside them, creating a small circle of three. "Sofia," she said, "what do you think about Mr. James joining our family officially?" "I think it's the best idea ever," Sofia said without hesitation. "But Mama, can we get a bigger apartment? I love sharing a bed with you, but if Mr. James is going to be my daddy, I think grown-ups need their own room for grown-up things." The laughter that erupted from the adults around them was warm and inclusive, the kind of community joy that happens when people witness love finding its way home despite the obstacles that life had placed in its path. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months later, James Harrison stood in the living room of their new apartment. Spacious enough for Sofia to have her own bedroom, but warm enough to feel like home. Watching Maria teach Sofia how to make tamales for Christmas dinner. The kitchen was filled with the sounds of laughter and gentle instruction, with flour dusting every surface and love seasoning every dish. On the refrigerator, held in place by magnets, was Sofia's latest school assignment. A family tree that showed James and Maria at the top, Sofia in the middle, and extending branches that included Bob the security guard, Principal Williams, Dr. Martinez, and all the other people who had become part of their chosen family. Next to it was a crayon drawing. Not the original one that had been lost in a wastepaper basket, but a new one that Sofia had made for their new home. It showed 3 stick figures under a rainbow, standing in front of a house that was bigger than the old one, but somehow exactly the same in all the ways that mattered. The figures were holding hands, and the rainbow stretched across the entire paper, a symbol of promise and possibility and love that had weathered the storm. Harrison Industries had launched its community outreach program 6 months ahead of schedule, with Maria as its director and James as its primary funding source. The program provided job training, childcare support, and educational scholarships to families in situations similar to the one Maria and Sofia had faced. It was the first corporate initiative that James had ever felt truly proud of, because it measured success not in profit margins, but in lives changed and families strengthened. Sofia had started taking piano lessons, not because they could afford them now, but because every child deserved the chance to make music. She was learning to read notes and play scales, but her favorite thing was still making up songs about her family and their adventures. "Mama," Sofia called from the kitchen, Daddy James, can you help me roll this masa? My hands are too small." James set down the quarterly report he had been reviewing, some habits never completely disappeared, and joined his family in the kitchen, his expensive suit traded for jeans and a t-shirt that Sofia had picked out for him because it was the color of happiness. As he helped Sofia shape the masa with hands that had once only known how to sign contracts and make decisions, James marveled at how completely his definition of success had transformed. The board still respected his leadership, the company still posted impressive profits, and his reputation in the business world remained intact. But now he measured his days not in dollars earned, but in smiles shared, bedtime stories read, and moments of ordinary magic that made wealth seem like the least important thing in the world. "Are you happy, Daddy James?" Sofia asked as they worked side by side, her small hands carefully mimicking his movements. James looked around the kitchen at his wife. They had married in a small ceremony 3 months ago, with Sofia as the maid of honor and Bob walking Maria down the aisle, and his daughter. Adoption papers had been finalized just last week. At the home they had built together from love and second chances, and the courage to choose each other despite all the reasons why it shouldn't have worked. "Sofia," he said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head, "I didn't even know it was possible to be this happy." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share, James Harrison understood that sometimes the best business decisions are the ones that have nothing to do with business at all. Sometimes the most important acquisitions can't be bought. They can only be earned through love, patience, and the willingness to become worthy of the trust that others place in your heart. Outside their window, the city sparkled with lights and possibilities, but inside apartment 4B of their new building, 3 people had found everything they needed: each other, and the knowledge that families aren't just born. They're chosen, they're built, and they're sustained by the daily decision to love each other through all of life's beautiful, messy, wonderful complications. Sofia's rainbow had come true, one crayon stroke at a time. What does it mean to choose your family? Sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones that shouldn't have worked, but did, because love found a way. How has love surprised you in your own life, showing up in places and people you never expected? What an incredible journey we've been on together. From a cold corporate decision to a family built on love and second chances. Sofia's courage to speak up for her mama reminds us that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. This story proves that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the people who choose to love us unconditionally. Have you ever had someone surprise you with their kindness? Or maybe you've been the one to step up when someone needed you most. Share your own stories of unexpected heroes in the comments below. I read every single one, and they inspire future stories. If this tale of redemption and family touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us of the good in this world. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective on life. Remember, we're all just one act of courage away from changing someone's world. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of love to heal what seems broken. You matter, your story matters, and I'll see you in the next one.